Peter. Let's keep it simple. The Pacific Northwest, west of the Cascade Mountains. Yeah.
If it's dry, and Seattle is known for its rain, what does that make like Death Valley or like the Midwest? Is that a wet region?
What the heck is going on? How much rain does Seattle actually get? Anybody know?
A lot.
So first question, how wet is the Pacific Northwest? Anybody know?
Drier than the Amazon rainforest?
It is drier than the Amazon rainforest. Compared to other cities in the United States of America, anybody know? Where we rank?
California. It's wetter than California. And drier than North Dakota and I don't have any numbers. I just don't know what I have.
Seattle happens to be about the 70th wettest city in the United States of America. Yep. New Orleans, Miami, Birmingham, Alabama, Memphis, Jacksonville, Orlando, New York gets about 50 inches of rain a year. Houston, Texas, about 50. Providence, Rhode Island, where I grew up, 47 inches of rain a year. Hartford, Connecticut, 46 inches of rain. Seattle gets about 36 inches of rain a year.
But that's mostly hurricane country. I mean, that's a hurricane country.
Hurricane country? How? Miami, they get about one hurricane every 10 years. Less. We're talking on average.
But that's like what in another place when it rains, like it rains. It's like a
Yeah.
storm.
Yes,
but
very good.
here it's just like constant.
Very good. Very good. Here, this is what our precipitation looks like. We get most of our precipitation in the wintertime. Okay? And when it rains, how does it rain? Here. It's that drizzle. Just rain, right. It's just. And this is not just in Seattle, even in our nearby rainforests, like the Hoh rainforest, for example. The definition of a rainforest is an area that receives over 100 inches of rain a year. So the Hoh rainforest gets over 100 inches of rain a year. But if you still looked at the pattern of rainfall, you get the same thing, which is it basically rains nonstop, not heavy, but it rains nonstop from October 1st until the 4th of July, right? It's just constantly drizzling, constant drizzle, constant drizzle, constant drizzle, okay? But when summer hits, what happens? It's dry. We're actually drier than Los Angeles in the summertime. Yeah, we have a very, very dry summer. It's one of the things that struck me when I first moved to the Northwest. Now, think about this from a plant's perspective. What do plants need to live?
Water.
They need water. What else do they need? Does somebody say oxygen? They need water and they need sunlight. Excellent. So, if you're a plant living in the Pacific Northwest, when do you get your water? When do you get your sunlight? You're screwed. Because when you have water, you do not have sunlight. When you have sunlight, you don't have water. So for a plant, it's living in a drought. Deciduous trees, like maples, oaks, they like places that have hot, wet summers. Because what do they do in the wintertime?
Shed their
They shed their leaves. So in the Midwest, the Northeast, what happens to the temperatures in the wintertime? It gets, doesn't just get cold. How cold does it get?
Very.
Right, it freezes, right? And effectively, when it's frozen, how much water is the tree getting? None, right? But do they care? No, they've lost their leaves. They're basically dormant, okay? So they are good with wet, hot summers and cold, dry winters. The exact opposite of us. Now conifers, they don't lose their needles in the wintertime, right? They have their needles year round. So they're able to photosynthesize even in the wintertime, even when there's very little sunlight. And in the summertime, it's drought conditions and they can survive. They can basically survive in the summer and get by in the winter. Now the consequence of this is they grow very slowly. Our conifers around here grow very, very slowly. A friend of mine was doing research on Douglas firs in Olympic National Park, and she would find these seedlings that were about that big that were 10 years old. And things grow super, super slowly. It gets even worse when you go up like north, like British Columbia, Alaska. Oh, first time I went to Alaska, it was like, where are all the trees? They're all these short little stubby trees. They're like, you know, it's really cold. You've been up there? Oh, you live there? Oh, cool. Whereabouts? Anchorage. Right on. Yeah. That's a no joke place to grow up. Yeah. Do you miss the winters? It was funner there. There's more stuff going on. Yeah. Right on. But what about the summers here?
board.
Really?
There's no summer there, like over there, the sun goes down at around 11.
Yeah.
For a child to like play outside for that long time.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, that's true. I couldn't do it. I'm not sure I could handle it. Yeah, that extreme daylight would really mess with me. Yeah.
So what would happen if we planted a conifer in the super like hot like summers? Wouldn't it grow super fast?
What ends up happening is they get outcompeted by everything else. Because the other things grow faster.
What if you eliminate competition?
If you just grow them, they do okay. There are conifers that live back there, usually in certain habitats that the deciduous trees don't live. They'll grow. They'll grow. Yeah. They'll be okay. Yeah. Like there are these tropical conifers. You ever seen these tropical conifers? So you can get conifers in. Usually it's in places where the soil conditions aren't good for deciduous trees. Deciduous trees will usually outcompete them. Or conifers will sometimes be the first tree that comes in, or an early tree, and then the deciduous trees take over. Yeah. Okay? So that's why we are the evergreen state. Haven't you always wondered?
Evergreens are our most popular tree.
Right, because evergreens are conifers. Now there are other trees that are evergreen that are conifers, like the madrone that we learned about, that's an evergreen as well, because it maintains its leaves year round. By the way, when I talk about deciduous trees drop all of their leaves at one time. Madrones lose their leaves, but they lose them kind of like a cat or a dog loses its hair, like we lose our hair. It loses a little bit here and there, right? It's not like it just drops off. All right. Any other questions on that? No? We're going to talk about plant sex. We've discussed this a little bit already. We're going to go more in depth. I'm going to focus specifically on the flowering plant, the angiosperms. Okay. Plant reproduction, it's important for many, many, many reasons. Not the least of which, as we will see, is that humans have taken advantage of Courtney. Hello. Humans have taken advantage of the modes and methods of plant reproduction for our own purposes. Now, if you read Michael Pollan's article, which you really need to read before the exam on Thursday, he would argue that in many ways plants have taken advantage of us in this process, but whatever. Okay? This is the cacao tree. This is the flower of the cacao tree, and this is the fruit of the cacao tree. Yes?
Is this a PowerPoint on campus?
Yeah. Like all of them. You haven't found it yet? Good for you. Did you find it? Importance of plant reproduction?
Of the previous one.
Okay. The cacao tree is the source of what? Chocolate. Do people like chocolate? Yes. Okay. You would not have chocolate if it weren't for plant sex. Okay. The fruit is where that cacao is located, and as we learned about previously, remember the fruit is the swollen ovary of the plant. And the plant puts all these yummy, tasty things in those ovaries so that we will eat it. And in exchange, we disperse their seeds. Okay, yeah.
That's not true anymore, right?
What
For
do you
a
mean?
lot of our societies, where like we go to the bathroom in, on toilets that the sewer system filters it out. Right? They process it, so therefore the seed isn't dispersed.
What's the landfill now?
Let's think about it a little more like big. Okay. So, do I poop out cacao seeds in my backyard and cacao trees grow in my backyard? No. You don't know what I do on the weekends, but that's not it. But do we, as humans, create cacao plantations? Do we collect the seeds from trees, from these cacao trees, cut down other trees, fertilize land, divert rivers to bring water to grow those trees? Yeah, I'd say that's pretty awesome seed dispersal. See what I'm saying? Yeah. So the original scheme has altered, but the ultimate goal is still being met, right?
Yeah.
Now, plants are also able to reproduce vegetatively, which is to say, cloning. And here's one example. This is an aloe, and these are little babies, and I'll drop these. We've got a jade tree at our house that will just drop to little jades, or spider lilies, spider plants, right? They just like make little clones themselves and drop those. So plants are able to just clone themselves. But remember the spectrum of reproduction? Remember how it works? On one end is no reproduction. On the other end is what? Sex with strangers that you know really well and they've been tested. Okay? Next to no reproduction is cloning. Because the species isn't going to die out, but there's no change in genetic variability, right? So if the environment does change, you can be in really bad shape. Right? So it's not ideal, but it can be done. Okay? And plants will do that. All right. I am going to just kind of go over this again. Remember I talked about the alternation of generation? This is a couple weeks ago, but just kind of want to reiterate. Remember the two phases of the life cycle of plants. There's the sporophyte phase, which is the diploid phase of the life cycle. And then there's the gametophyte phase, which is the haploid phase of the life cycle. Remember the term gametophyte has gamete in it. Gametes are a fancy way of saying sperm and egg, right? So gametophytes produce sperm and egg. Okay. And in the simpler plants, they have free-living gametophytes, like mosses, for example. That is the gametophyte that you see. Ferns have a free-living gametophyte. As we get to the flowering plants, however, the sporophyte phase of the life cycle dominates. So when you see, like this is a cherry tree, that mature cherry tree is the sporophyte. And the gametophytes have gotten really, really, really small. The female gametophyte exists inside of the flower and never leaves the flower. Okay. And the male gametophyte does leave the flower in the form of pollen. Okay. The male gametophyte gets transferred to the female part of another flower, and as we'll see, the male gametophyte releases the sperm fertilizes the egg, we get a seed, and then on it goes. All right, questions on that? And it's called alternation generation because one generation is diploid, the next generation is haploid, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Yeah?
So are the spores for like only seedless plants?
The spores are produced in flowering plants, but they never leave the plant. Yeah. Yeah.
Why?
Why? The big reason is water, right? So for a spore to leave the plant and live on its own requires water, right? To actually grow up on its own. So we tend to find those seedless plants like you're talking about, like the ferns and the equisetum, we tend to find those in wet places where those spores can grow up on their own and become gametophytes. When you don't have as much water around, when you don't have to rely upon water, if you keep the spore within the plant itself, it can actually mature on its own into a mature gametophyte. It's similar to the evolution of mammals in the animal kingdom. Reptiles have to lay eggs, right? Laying an egg is a tricky thing because your next generation is out there in the open. So you have to take care of it, you've got to guard it, you know, one of the parents has to be hanging out, taking care of this thing. What mammals have done is kept the baby on the mother, right? In the marsupials, it's in a pouch. In the placentals, it's inside the womb. That's kind of nice because then mom can go off and do whatever she needs to do and still exist and not worry about the baby. It's the same basic thing going on in here. Because the female gametophyte stays within the flower, it can keep it under the right conditions and doesn't have to worry about external factors as much. Okay?
So you're saying the spores are like the before phase, like for the gametophytes?
Very good, yep. The sporophyte still produces spores, it's just it never leaves the plant. It still produces it inside the plant, yeah. Okay? All right. So just a quick overview. In angiosperms, flowers contain the organs for sexual reproduction. I've got a model of that over there. The pollen grains come from microspores, spores in the anthers, the male part of the flower, and then the eggs and other cells, we'll learn about those in a little bit. They come from the megaspore, which is in the carpel, the female part of the flower. All right, here we go. So, don't worry about this term whorl. It's not that important. It's kind of an older concept. Here we have the male part of the flower, the stamen. The stamen has two parts. It has the anther on top, and that's where the pollen gets produced. Okay. The anther is being supported by the filament. All the filament does is it holds the anther on top. anther, filament, the entire thing is the stamen, okay? In the female part, the carpel. Now remember, we talked about this before, we were looking at fruits. Some plants can have multiple carpels, right, and creates what we call the pistil overall. You can use the term carpel and pistil interchangeably for the Lepidoptera. I'm not gonna worry about that. The carpel has three parts to it. It has the stigma on top. You can remember stigma is sticky because that is where the pollen lands and gets stuck to. Stigma is sticky. Stigma, and the style connects the stigma to the ovary down here. The ovary. And this is what's going to become the fruit. Inside the ovary, you have the ovules. The ovules make the eggs. Okay? All right. Questions? Oh, all right, good. Okay. Don't worry about complete versus incomplete flowers. Perfect, imperfect flower. Perfect flowers have both stamens and carpels. So this is a perfect flower. It is a hermaphrodite. Like that flower is a hermaphrodite. Imperfect flowers are found on some plants where they have a stamen or a carpel, but not both. So you have male flowers or female flowers. And you can get male flowers and female flowers on the same plant, or you can get them on different plants. For example, I think I've got a picture of this. Oh, shoot. Corn. You have male flowers on top, and you've got female flowers down below. Okay? So those are examples of imperfect flowers. Some plants have both male and female flowers on the same plant. Those plants are called monoecious, like corn would be monoecious. Monoecious, mono means what? You know? One, right? Aecious, remember what aecious comes like the root? What it means? It means house. It means house. So both sexes on the plant. Right? Oak trees are monoecious, apple trees, most plants we look at are called monoecious. Dioecious plants have separate sexes. There are a couple that we've talked about. Willows, we saw those in the field trip. And remember another dioecious plant? What's that?
Ginkgo.
Ginkgo, good. Another one. Most valuable cash crop in the state of Washington.
Marijuana?
Very good, weed. It's a dioecious plant. Okay. All right. So this is the overview of where we're going to go. Where we have, sort of here, in the male part, in the anther, it's going to produce the pollen. Down here. That pollen gets shed, it's going to end up on the stigma, and then fertilization will occur. On the other side, we have the development of the egg, which occurs inside of the microspore, or sorry, the megaspore, down here. And this gets really kind of funky in here because it's actually, plants do what's called a double fertilization. We'll go into this in a bit. So one fertilization occurs, it fertilizes the egg, and that becomes the embryo. And then there's a second fertilization that occurs, and that leads to that nutritive tissue inside of the plant. Okay? So this is sort of where we're going to go. Development of the pollen on one side, development of the egg on the other, and then fertilization. Okay? All right. Let's take a break.